Hello everyone, Echidna writes here. As we prepare to start Book 3 of The Black Ship, I'd like to announce the official launch of the side story, Barony of the Screaming Forest. Initially, this was going to be part of the main story, written entirely by me, but after much deliberation, I decided to make it a long-form side story focused on the events happening on Hago and on Wyatt's Barony. This side story focuses more on the concept of state development, with the usual Black Ship shenanigans happening. You may have noticed the mention of names in the main story, such as Ino, Elizabeth, and Rachel, but with no context on who they are. Well, this side story is where you'll find them. I would like to thank David Orf for taking charge and the lead in writing and developing the story, always with my permission and supervision to make it into a reality. So please, all thanks go to him and his wonderful work. I've only supervised and monitored with addition and proofreading to ensure Black Ship level quality and in-universe interactions. Enjoy. More is to come. The Black Ship Side Story, Barony of Screaming Forests, Day 1. Prologue. Wyatt finished looking at the map of his barony. After adjusting for natural geography, the calculations said that he had a total of 418.3 square kilometers. A quick pass from the Nornavio had allowed the sensors to scan and accurately photograph and map his land, but he was still having a real problem thinking of it as his land. The sensors detected a total of 3 settlements, along with a few scattered buildings that were likely farms. There was a village on the north coast, a very large village or perhaps a small town on the south coast, and almost exactly halfway between the two, a tiny hamlet in the forest next to a good-sized lake. In total, there were apparently 4,306 structures of sufficient size that they might be a dwelling, and they had all been numbered, but that still gave him no idea of how many people his land could support. He looked across at Clara, his eyes reflecting the pain in his soul, and said, "I hate being a blue blood." Clara looked up from her own datapad, her eyes glistening with a playful yet curious spark. "What's the matter, Wyatt?" "I have all this land and over 4,000 buildings, but I have no idea what condition any of them are in, or if there's enough food in the land to feed all the people with no home to return to on the cattle ship, or what supplies they need, or where I need to buy stuff from, or everything!" he exclaimed in exasperation. Looking him straight in the eye, Clara replied, "Now extrapolate your barony to the entire principality, and you'll understand the weight set upon House Astor, Wyatt." Feeling as if he'd been punched in the gut, he asked, "How the hell do you do it?" With her emotionless face set, she replied, "Carefully. And we have the advantage of generations of fundamentals and established systems to help us organize everything to an acceptable level. Even so, it is a daunting task that requires legions of administrative personnel and bureaucratic standardized levels." Wyatt shook his head in frustration. "So how the hell am I supposed to know what to do?" Clara put down her own pad. "Start simple, Wyatt. Ask yourself, what do people need?" Wyatt took a deep breath as he could feel the lesson coming on. After taking a moment to calm himself, he gave his answer. "People need shelter and food, clean water to drink, and at the very least, basic sanitation." Clara nodded. "Indeed so. Hopefully you have enough buildings to provide shelter for all of these people. For food, you can hunt, fish, farm, or trade for, or some combination of all of those. Even emergency or MRE rations can be acquired cheaply for sustenance. Access to clean water and sanitation is more challenging to procure. You need numerous resources such as filters and disinfectants to make water drinkable. For sanitation, you want to ensure that it does not return to the food or clean water without treatment. And for that—" She made a small pause, her eyes set on her night banneret. Wyatt finished her sentence. "I'll need more resources, tools, and equipment," he sighed deeply. "I think I understand. This is where founding a business comes in. The people will need to buy in anything they can't make or grow themselves, right?" Clara smiled. "Correct, although to be fair, there is also bartering." Wyatt looked confused. "Bartering? With what?" The princess set down her datapad, pursing her lips. "That is the question, isn't it? Let's say you have a spare room but no food, and I grow food but have no shelter. We barter with each other so I can use your spare room in return for some food for you. No credits change hands. Hygo has emerged from 30 years of a misleading, tyrannical rulership and a planetary invasion. House Forentis and houses under their rulership will provide humanitarian aid, but at least to start off with, I expect bartering will be common planet-wide. They have no tangible economic power yet and must be reintegrated. It will take time. For now, you need people who are good negotiators to get the best deals in the short, mid, and long terms, taking into account what you can provide and produce versus what you need. Wyatt was now busy making notes on his datapad. Understood. I need negotiators to make deals and administer things on my behalf. Clara nodded, pleased, and carried on with her lesson. You will need to decide what sort of business you will have. Wyatt stopped to look at the princess. Fishing, and then a woodmill. What else can be done? The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees, and Cynthia, who had been quietly knitting another one of her monstrosities, simply snickered. Wyatt blinked in confusion. But I thought that's what you meant? This time, Clara just raised an eyebrow. Those are local production businesses, but what you need... Ask yourself this. What are the businesses that'd produce worth selling for active capital? What kind of structure will your business follow? Will you have shareholders who receive a percentage of the profits in exchange for their immediate investment in your business? Do you want to keep all the profits for yourself? Or will you choose a cooperative where everyone gets an amount out based on their work and contributions? Cynthia sighed with mild exasperation. Clara? Wyatt scratched his neck. Clara? I have no idea what half of these words even mean, and I'm not sure I have a long enough life expectancy to ever really understand. Can you suggest something suitable? Cynthia laughed, giving her friend a smug, victorious side-eye. Clara shot her friend a look. Shush you. Then she looked back at Wyatt. Let's make it simple. Do you want all the profits to come to you, or do you want the villagers to get some of the profits? Bear in mind, you're going to have to invest a substantial amount of credits no matter your decision in this venture. Remember this word, investment. You need to try to recover that somehow. Where do your priorities lie? Wyatt thought about this only for a moment before saying, I'd like to help the people if I can. Clara nodded. If so, I recommend you choose to establish your company as a cooperative. A producer cooperative, to be precise. As the lord of land and the main investor, you own 51% of the company as the major investor, and your workers will own the other 49% between them. They get a wage, but they also get a tiny share of the profits, so the work they do benefits them twice. Through a screening process, we've discovered people with multiple talents and experience. The vast majority are commoners, specialists, and educated workers that will be at your disposal. They go from children as young as 5 to adults up to 50 years at the extreme. She paused for a moment. The Drazen are nothing if not thorough and picky with their cattle. At the mention of the damnable aliens and the children, Wyatt closed his eyes for a moment, memories coming to him as fire burned in his chest. I want to do something nice for them, something to bring them fun and laughter. I don't know what it will be, but I intend to try. And if I can bring the rest some peace of mind and a place away from the Drazen, then I'll happily do it. I don't care if I make credits for myself or not. Silence reigned for a few seconds before Clara cleared her throat. I'll send you a list of who we have so far. Only a little over 500 have been interviewed so far. I've prioritized people I thought might be useful first. Oh, and there are 2 exiled nobles in the list so far. One is a young noblewoman exiled by a jealous brother when he took over the family. She's an accountant. If her skills are sufficient, she will be of suitable aid for you and your barony, Wyatt. The other is the bastard child of a noble father who apparently got tired of his offspring's insults and sent him away. His education is surprisingly high for a mere bastard in the field of administration. They may prove useful, but I'll let you make the final decision. With a ping, a long list of names, job descriptions, experience, and other details appeared on Wyatt's datapad. Clara added, I've also asked the general if he can loan us somebody who can provide information on the flora and fauna on Hago. Wyatt looked puzzled for a moment. What does... he began, only for both Clara and Cynthia to call out simultaneously. Plants and animals? Wyatt nodded. Okay, I'm sure a guide will be helpful. There's so many things I'd not thought of. A heavy groan rumbled in his chest. Being a noble is far more complicated than I ever thought. And with that, he started to read down the list. Day 1. Wyatt waited inside the shuttle in the Eternal Garden while the volunteers were being loaded. It had been a difficult and long process to choose who to take on the first trip to Hago, but in the end he decided the priorities would be food, water, shelter, and sanitation. The observations from orbit had shown there were several boats in the small harbor that was part of the town at the southeastern corner of his barony. According to the list provided by Clara, there were more than 30 people who claimed knowledge of fishing from the sea. He had asked for someone with experience of boat handling, preferably of small and medium-sized vessels, who could look over whatever vessels they found. Apparently, wherever the Drazen had claimed their victims must have had a lot of water, because there were also 5 people who claimed to have shipwright knowledge, so he had added one to his list. He had also added 3 general mechanics. He was fairly sure that after 30 years of almost complete isolation, machines on Hago would be poorly maintained. The orbital images clearly showed well-defined field boundaries around the town, so he had added a farmer to the list. According to the data, there were 16 people with farming skills, so he had simply asked for the one with the widest range. Water and sanitation came next. He got an experienced lady plumber who'd been working in the trade for 16 years in a domed colony and a sewer man with 12 years' experience who claimed to know the intricacies of all types of sewer systems. For shelter, he selected a small team consisting of 3 builders, a carpenter, an electrician, and an architectural technician who claimed to be able to conduct surveys. With these 14 core tradespeople selected, he had added a medical technician and a nurse because accidents might happen, and a pair of cooks to prepare food for everyone. MREs and common-grade rations were filling, but hardly palatable at the best of times. Wyatt wasn't sure if there were any Drazen in the area, so he called for the most experienced non-commissioned officer from the Auxilla prisoners, one Sergeant Major Michael Starrant, and asked him to select 24 people from the remaining captured Auxilla and militia forces. Lastly, after taking Declan's advice, he added a veterinarian to check the condition of any, if any, remaining farm animals, a woodsman to check the condition and quality of the forest, a rail worker, since Ishtanel had told him that re-establishing the railroads would be a priority of House Ferentis, so having him check it personally was a good idea. And lastly, 2 choices he would have never considered. Again, Declan Oakmoon suggested adding a machinist or metal worker, pointing out that several of the buildings were simply too large to be just a house or a storage unit. The possibility that there were workshops available warranted their inclusion. For her part, Clara suggested he take Eino Riesenkampf, the exiled bastard son of Lord Juhani Riesenkampf. Wyatt was concerned about this choice at first. After all, he had been exiled by his own father. Exiled nobles were, well, exiled, but they were still blue bloods at heart, even if they were bastards. But after a short talk with him, Wyatt concluded 2 things. Firstly, Eino was smart and seemed willing to work hard in order to prove himself. And secondly, that Juhani was the typical self-serving, glory-obsessed blue blood he despised so much. That alone was enough for him to agree to have him serve as an administrator provisionally. Through Clara's orders, the logistical division had ensured everyone had been issued new clothes, plus essentials before they left. Wyatt had also taken a set of commoners' clothing to wear, both because he did not want to get his uniform covered in dirt, and they were honestly more comfortable. Declan, who had insisted that he accompany Wyatt with his men to provide additional protection, was horrified when he saw what Wyatt was wearing, complete with the knife hanging from his belt. Declan had asked him, "My lord, how will people recognize you as their lord if you look just like them, and with only a knife to protect yourself? I must insist that my lord reconsider this course of action. By Julius's name, arm yourself with more than a mere knife, my lord." Wyatt smiled, lifting his coat to reveal the matched pair of soul-snatchers hidden beneath it. "I am not unarmed, and hopefully, if I am dressed like this and not looming over them, then the people might relax a little bit and perhaps give more honest answers." The look of horror Declan gave him at that reply was worth it, as was the quiet, "as my lord wishes," he uttered in reply. On landing the shuttle near the road just north of the town, everyone picked up the bags they had been issued with and exited the shuttle. The sergeant major made sure that all of his men and women had weapons fully loaded and safety catches locked. Wyatt had already made it clear to him that there were to be no accidents if it could be helped. With all the captured Duke Draymore vessels, one thing they were not short of was individual quality weapons and ammunition. And so, with Declan and his men leading the way whilst the sergeant major followed with his troops at the rear, the group of men and women walked towards the center of town. It was easy to work out where to go, even without a map. A clock tower was visible from most of the streets. As they passed by the houses, Wyatt occasionally would stop and look in a window, but all the houses were very similar. Two basic designs were available in left- and right-handed versions, featuring simple wooden frames with painted clapboard covering their outer walls. However, for all of them, the different colored paints had faded and in places were flaking off. He asked Igson, a young man who claimed to be a builder. "What is your opinion, Igson?" The young man cleared his throat at being called out suddenly. "Well, my lord, they're of a simple design, probably made in a factory as a kit, then built on a slab, but you will note that even though in parts the paint has come clean off, there doesn't appear to be much sign of rot. That's pretty good going for 30 years without a new coat of paint. The wood must be somewhat resistant to the weather. You see here," he said, pointing to a corner point that had split and was soft to the touch. "The water got in here and had nowhere to drain to, so it's gone soft and is rotting, but where the water can drain off the surfaces, the wood seems fine. I'd say that is good news." Wyatt nodded. "Do you think they'll all be like that?" he asked. Igson stopped, scratching his bearded chin in thought, looking around as he did so. "Honestly, my lord, I cannot tell, but from what we have seen so far, maybe we can make any repairs by taking apart one house and using it to repair several others. There is certainly no shortage of materials in that aspect, and the damages don't seem to be that bad." Wyatt grimaced internally at the constant "my lords" he was receiving. It churned his stomach fiercely. He stopped and held up his hands, making everyone come to a halt. "Please, I am just a pilot. No more, my lord. When you address me, you may call me Wyatt, or if you prefer, Lieutenant, Lieutenant Commodore, or Sir will be more than sufficient. Is that clear?" From the rear, a chorus of voices replied, "Sir, yes, sir," whilst the civilians around him replied a tentative, "Yes, sir," except for Aino, who slightly sheepishly simply said, "Yes, Wyatt," causing Wyatt to smile. "Much better. Now let us go and see what else the town has to offer." They continued down the street until they came to a crossroads. Here the houses dramatically changed, with the four structures on the corners of the roads being slightly larger, built of stone and timber and more substantial. They turned left at the crossroads to discover that the road now ran between two high stone walls. After a short distance, it passed through a stone arch under the clock tower and into what turned out to be the town square. The difference in style was startling, and as they walked into the middle of the square, Wyatt looked around him. In the middle of the square was what he initially thought was a stone planter. Still, as he approached, he saw that it was, in fact, some sort of fountain with a large octagonal base. Just a little water remained in the base. No water came from any of the four spouts that should have kept it full. At its center, a statue must have once stood, but all that was left was a broken-off stone lump of the base, with the toe of a single armored foot remaining. He was standing in a cobbled square, roughly 65 to 70 meters on each side, and here the architecture was very different. Directly across from the clock tower under which they had entered was a large, ruined and burnt-out structure that Wyatt immediately recognized as a railway station. Of course, the fact that he had the map on the datapad showing rail lines just the other side was a big clue. Still, the layout of the ruined structure was remarkably similar to those on Volantis. On both sides, a series of stone arches, each with a step up, led to a walkway covered by the upper stories where 5 shop fronts once opened to offer their wares. Now just 3 remained in total. From metal brackets above the middle arch in front of those shops hung small signs indicating a baker's, butcher's, and fresh food shops. The other shop fronts were roughly boarded up. However, those 3 remained open, and he could see things through the windows. At the far end of each row of shops, another street appeared to cross between the shops and the station. Above the arches, the buildings featured a mix of 2 and 3 extra floors to each shop front. The structures here were timber beams with different colored infill between them, each window having a pair of shutters that could be either open or closed across them. Where he could see the roofs, they were covered in gray slats that had a hint of purple in them. Turning around, he looked back the way he came. To the left of the arch stood an imposing all-stone building, with 4 broad steps up to a substantial set of heavy wooden double doors above the doors carved into the arch. The words Town Hall somewhat gave away its function. Small windows at ground level suggested a cellar or basement existed, whilst the arrangement of windows higher up indicated that whilst the entrance level was of regular height, a grand room on the next floor was considerably higher. Finally, another row of windows of regular size pierced the stone walls, whilst in the roof above a final line of dormers with small windows indicated that the town hall was spread over 5 floors in total. The clock tower must have been 6 or 7 stories tall, and whilst the clock face visible from outside the square on the back of the tower was a simple functional thing, the one facing the station was far more intricate with various sculptures decorating it, and at one time its now faded paint must have been spectacular. At the top of the tower, the roof rose steeply to a flattened point, the tower being wider than it measured front to back, with each corner at the top of the tower having a small circular turret each with its conical roof. Lastly, to the right of the clock tower, another large building sat, again with steps up to double doors and small windows at ground level indicating a cellar. However, this time only the basement and the main floor had stone walls with 2 floors above, with the same timber frame with, in this case, a dirty cream infill as he'd seen above the shops, more shuttered windows, and in the slate roof, as with the town hall dormer windows, over the door on another of those metal brackets, a faded chessboard hung with the words "The Checkers" still visible on it. Wyatt watched as Declan Oakmoon seemed to become more excited, walking backwards towards the station building as if to take in the whole square. Finally, he started laughing, and Wyatt rushed over to him. "What in Julius's name is so funny?" he asked. It took Declan almost a minute to come to his senses. "I'm sorry, my lord, it's the setting. Someone has tried to create a scene from a fairy tale. When I was a boy, my father gave me an illustrated copy of Grimm's Fairy Tales, a series of ancient, strange fantasy tales. I have it to this day. If I get annoyed or upset, I can often find one of the 200 stories to improve my mood." Taking out his datapad, Declan called up the book, and there, along with strange monsters and illustrations of all manner of strange things, Wyatt saw what Declan was talking about. The buildings, whilst not identical, were very similar. There was even a clock tower in one picture that was almost the same down to the 4 little turrets at the top, but Wyatt could not understand it. "I see the similarity, but why did they build it like this?" he asked. Declan walked Wyatt to the ruined station entrance and turned him so he faced the middle of the square. "Look, my lord, this is what you would see when you arrived by train, fresh from the spaceport in a private carriage, if not a private train. Imagine it all fresh with flower boxes at the windows, the shops all open, perhaps tables set outside the inn, and a fountain in the center. Probably with a statue of the lord they were visiting on top, maybe even with commoners dressed up in costume. It would be just like a film set. As for why, it would be his way to show off, an outrageous display of wealth, but at least he made it practical." Wyatt shook his head in disbelief. "So, all of this was made in some sort of way for a local lord to show off?" Declan thought for a moment. "Not quite, my lord. I've seen similar constructions that imitate settings and the like. Most are private residences. Empty shells built for their entertainment when they fancy a distraction or an elaborate play. These? They were intended to be functional. The local lord or house in the past ensured to make the buildings practical. Oh, and they are well made. The paint is faded, but I cannot see anything falling off of them. They were all built of good materials and of a strong design. If I were to make an educated guess, I'd say that this is the product of borrowed inspiration." Wyatt was forced to agree. This long-dead noble had, at the very least, tried to provide good homes for the commoners who served him, whereas many had failed to do so. They walked back to where the rest of the group stood, and Wyatt looked at the time, just after 9. According to General Swallowtail, the guide to plants and animals was due here at midday, just under 3 hours away. No point in exploring further away until they turned up. However, there was more that could be done. Turning to his contingent, he ordered, "Sergeant Major, 3 men for protection detail, please. They are going for a walk to the harbor. I also need our boat builder, fisherman, a mechanic, and a builder, please." As he awaited the group to assemble, he took out a spare datapad and a paper copy of the town map before continuing. "Let's see. We are here," he said as he took a colored pencil from his pocket to draw on the printout. "Follow this route down to the harbor. If you find anything dangerous, take cover and call for backup. Don't eat any plants or berries until the expert arrives and tells us what's safe or not. When you get to the harbor, he said, circling the area with the red pencil. "I want you to check out the boats and the buildings in this area. All the buildings on the map are numbered. I want to have an idea by the end of the day as to what condition everything is in. Will any boat or building need repairs, extra equipment, spare parts, whatever you think of, I want it recorded. When you are done, come back here. If you need to break into a boat or building, do so, but try to keep damage to a minimum. Wood is easier to obtain than glass, so please keep that in mind. Any questions?" The 7 men and women all shook their heads in unison. "Okay, off you go then," said Wyatt, and with 7 calls of "yes, sir," they went on their way. Wyatt looked around once more at the square, then called out, "Everyone else, split up into small groups and explore the buildings on the square. If you find a locked door, call out and one of the builders here will get you safely past it with as little damage as possible. If you find any damage to the building, such as a leaking roof, a rotten floor, or a broken window, ask one of the builders to inspect it. I'm going to see if the town hall has an office with a desk we can use to put all these reports together. We have 1 hour to look around, then report back with what you find, please." Getting into the town hall was harder than expected, as the doors were heavy. Igson finally said, "Sir, with respect, there are 2 ways to get in. Either the lock needs to be drilled out, and I do not have a strong enough drill for this size of lock, or we break a window." Wyatt drew one of his pistols and simply asked, "Where do I put the hole?" 3 seconds later, they were in. Wyatt, Declan, and Aino entered the town hall and immediately realized it had not been used in years. A thick layer of dust lay everywhere, only pushed aside by the opening of the front doors. Turning to Aino, Wyatt said, "Why don't you have a look around this floor and see what's here, whilst Declan and I go up to the top and work our way down. Maybe you can find a broom or cleaning materials and set up an office." Aino's reply was a simple "yes, sir," as Wyatt and Declan set off up a grand staircase to the top of the building. As they walked up the staircase, Declan turned to Wyatt and asked, "My lord, I am confused. You say you are from a common family and have no wish to be a noble, and yet in the last hour I have seen you command commoner and noble alike, with complete confidence." Wyatt paused and opened his mouth to give a reply, then shut it again. "He's right. It's not the same as giving my squadron orders, but it's not that different either. Maybe all this officer training with Admiral Redford is paying off, and I am becoming a better leader." Then he had another thought and smiled before replying. "I think that I have been doing so much training recently that maybe I stopped thinking about who I'm giving orders to and just started telling people what needs to be done. In my own experience as a commoner, if a noble gives you an order and you can do it, then you just go and do it. But I notice that you are still disobeying my commands and addressing me as my lord." Declan grinned and simply replied, "Yes, my lord, which is as it should be. Now shall we carry on looking around?" Before continuing to climb the stairs, Wyatt simply threw his hands in the air in resignation and followed the young man up the stairs. 45 minutes later, having had a good look around, they came back down. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, they both started to cough and sneeze as dust particles entered their lungs. Fortunately, the air swiftly cleared and they looked around. Aino was standing with a broom in his hand next to a doorway. To his left, a roller shutter had been raised, allowing them to see that beyond was a countertop, and beyond that a small office with a pair of desks and a couple of chairs. On the wall behind the desks was a pinboard on which Aino had already pinned one of the large paper maps Wyatt had made of the city. Wyatt looked at the young noble's grinning face. "I see you found a broom?" "Yes, sir. I also found keys, pencils, paperclips, a stapler, and a ruler. This office appears to have been maybe a local militia office or town guard's office, I'm not quite sure. There are no records anywhere that I can see, however I found the stairs to the basement. Down there are 2 cells, each with a metal toilet and wash basin and also an armory, empty of course, along with some storage rooms in one of which was this broom." Aino replied, holding up the broom. "So I swept out the dust thinking I could find something among the dirt. Most of it is outside now. On this floor there is another toilet cubicle off of the office, and behind that appears to be a small apartment. There's a kitchen bedroom and living room plus a bathroom with some decent furniture and bedding. There's still clothes in the wardrobe, sir. I guess whoever lived here died in the first days of the rebellion, and no one ever came back. But before anyone uses it again, I think maybe they will really want to clean the refrigerator. The contents are probably 30 years past their best," he joked. Wyatt nodded with a tiny smile. I think we will probably give that to the sergeant major. Upstairs, the top 2 floors are set up as offices, whilst the floor above this is a great hall with a raised stage at one end. I expect that was used for town meetings. Maybe they even had shows. Temporarily, we can place the troops there. It just needs a sweep out. Other than that, it's clean and dry. Has anyone come back with reports? Ino grinned. Yes, sir, waiting outside. I think they were waiting for me to finish sweeping. Wyatt gave a short laugh at that, then stepped outside. There was still a considerable amount of dust in the air around the entrance. Perhaps we should move away from this dust storm, he began. One of the militia or auxilia troops put their hand up. Yes, Private, what is it? Excuse me, sir, but there is a big store at the side of the tavern full of tables and chairs, sir. It won't take more than a few minutes to bring them out to the square, sir, said the young woman. Wyatt responded immediately. Good idea. Everyone, let us bring those tables and chairs out into the sun. Less than 5 minutes later, everyone was sitting around the tables discussing what they had found. The clock tower had apparently been unlocked, but the clock mechanism was still there. The weights that made it run could be wound up by hand, but there was also an electric motor, and it appeared that it was designed to reset automatically when the power was on. Fortunately, it could be replaced and made to work once more after being cleaned and repaired. The report on the inn was more in-depth. There were 20 rooms for guests spread over 2 floors, a large apartment within the roof space, presumably for the people running the inn, and 2 large function rooms on the entrance floor, one set up as a bar, whilst the other probably served as a place to eat. There was also a large clean kitchen and men's and ladies' toilets. Outside to the rear was a large garden, and to the side was the store where the outdoor furniture had been found. Interestingly, there was still beer in barrels at the bar that was still almost fresh enough to drink, suggesting that someone perhaps nearby used to brew it. Wyatt had Ano make a note to look out for a brewery. All 10 of the shops were one of 2 designs, one having an extra floor above the shop floor. Of the 3 most recently active shops, the worst had been the butcher's. The smell of rotting meat was pretty bad, with many flies and maggots still inside. The fresh produce store still had some items such as potatoes, apples, and big rounds of cheese that should be safe to eat in the medic's opinion so long as he tested them first. But other items needed to be disposed of whilst the bakery was full of stale bread. However, there was plenty of fresh flour in a store at the rear, but no power anywhere. Alan Boundy was their train professional. He told them that the station was not merely burnt out, but was totally unsafe, with walls that actually moved if you brushed up against them. However, he went on to explain that the rail yards behind might be salvageable if they could be cleared of the years of undergrowth that had covered them, but that further investigation would be needed. Overall, the reports indicated that there were no major faults with any of these buildings. Mostly they required fresh paint. There were a few missing slats and 2 small cracked windows that needed to be replaced, combined with the minor damage to some doors they had made when breaking in. Wyatt called out, "Where's the electrician?" "And I'll need a mechanic as well, please." 2 men, perhaps 10 years older than Wyatt, quickly approached. Wyatt told them, "I think until the Drazen attack, this town had electricity. Given the rotten food and other evidence, people continued to use this town as a sort of outpost, at least partially. Poorly maintained, but I doubt they could do more than that. Do you think that if I give you some help, you could find where the power came from and see if you can get it back?" Both men looked uneasy. "I realize you have no idea where the power comes from or if it can be fixed. I'm just asking you to try, to see what you can do, okay?" Wyatt finished, looking at them. "If it's within walking distance, sir, I can find the generators. I can also likely work out why it stopped, but I don't know until I find them if we can repair them," he said. The other man looked up. "We'll do our best, sir." Wyatt nodded. "Fair enough," he said. "I cannot ask more than that. Sergeant Major, send 5 soldiers with them. That way, if you need more help, you can send some back." Raising his voice, he continued, "I don't want anyone walking off on their own and getting lost or injured. A minimum of pairs at all times when exploring. Understood?" As the group of 5 men and 2 women, including the private who had told them about the tables and chairs, went to look for the generators, the 3 young nobles went to look in the inn. As said, it was clearly well used and generally clean. The furniture, built to stand up to a hard life, The kitchen was both good and bad. It had clearly once been well equipped, and it had certainly been taken care of until relatively recently as best they could, but the ovens must have failed long ago as a crude stove had been fashioned from scrap metal with a pile of logs nearby to feed it. Wyatt idly picked up a small log, turning it over in his hand as he walked around. The bedrooms upstairs seemed to be in a good state. There was plenty of bed linen in storage cupboards, and the bathrooms for each room were almost spotless. Clearly, the people here had done their best to look after the inn. Perhaps it had served as a gathering spot for the locals. He wasn't sure, but it would serve as accommodation for a night or two now. I know, this will serve nicely to hold our civilians tonight. Allocate rooms for everyone. I'll take some of the people to go and collect food and other supplies from the shuttle. Sir, was the only reply. Going outside, Wyatt got half a dozen people to follow him back to the shuttle, where they collected the supplies for several days. Then Wyatt sat in the open doorway of the shuttle and waited for the advisor from General Swallowtail. The message from the general had said midday, which was now just 10 minutes away. After a while, he took the small log from his pocket and the knife from his belt and began shaping the wood, getting a feel for it. He noticed a small flower at his feet and tried to copy it, gradually forming the shape of the petals from the wood. Almost an hour had passed when, off in the distance, he heard the sound of an engine approaching. Wyatt kept working on the wooden flower, trying to get as much detail into it as the wood would allow. Finally, the quad bike stopped just short of the shuttle. Without looking up, he called out, "You're late!" Wyatt put the knife back in his belt and stood up, blowing the last loose fragments from the wooden flower as he did so. The rider got off the bike and removed their helmet, revealing an attractive young woman with pale skin, freckles, and long, flowing red hair. "I know," she began, "but you try riding one of these over 1,200 kilometers in 2 days over rough roads and gravel tracks and see how you do." Wyatt pressed the button to close the shuttle's ramp and walked towards the young woman. "Given the distance you traveled and what you traveled on, I think an hour late can be forgiven," he said as he gestured towards the bike. "That looks uncomfortable." The young woman stretched and turned to face him. "It could have been worse. I found a deserted house to stop last night, so I only had 320 kilometers to ride this morning, just under 7 hours. I would have been earlier, but I had to cut a new track by hand to avoid a flooded section." "My name's Elizabeth," she said, offering her hand. Wyatt shook her hand and simply said, "I'm Wyatt, pleased to meet you. Let me help with your bags." Grabbing the larger of the 2 bags off the bike, he started to walk back to the center of town. "Follow me," he said with a smile. Elizabeth grabbed her other bag and started to follow him. Then her brain caught up. "Hey, wait a minute. Did you say your name was Wyatt?" she asked. "I did," replied Wyatt. "Wyatt. As in Wyatt Staples, the new Baron?" asked Elizabeth in a slightly surprised tone. Wyatt stopped and turned. "Yes, that's right, but Wyatt is fine, or if you really have to, sir, is fine. I'm also a Lieutenant Commodore if you prefer using my rank. But don't you dare start saying yes, my lord, and no, my lord, or we will have words on the matter. I've already got one person who ignores that request, and I don't want another one." Elizabeth looked at him for a moment, then shrugged. "Okay, Wyatt it is. I have to say, you are not what I expected. I was told to expect a naval officer who would shoot me if I, fucked up." Wyatt chortled loudly. "Ha! The uniform is difficult to keep clean. These clothes seemed far more practical. As for the shooting," he said, pulling the coat back slightly to reveal the soul snatchers beneath. "Only if I am given no choice." Elizabeth's light skin somehow went paler. "Damn, you really are the new Baron. Definitely not what I expected." Wyatt started walking off towards the square again, calling back, "If it's any consolation, you are not what I was expecting either. I asked General Swallowtail to send me someone who could identify the safe and dangerous plants and animals in the area. I was expecting someone considerably older, not a young woman barely out of her teens. I hope you know your stuff," Elizabeth yelled. "Hey, Baron. Firstly, I am not barely out of my teens. I'm still a teenager. I'm 19, and yes, I know my stuff. I know every important native plant and animal on the continent, which means I know all the plants, nuts, and berries that are good for you, and all the ones that will make you sick or kill you. Same for everything that walks, crawls, slithers, swims, or flies. I'm the best guide you're going to get on this forsaken planet of ours." Wyatt stopped walking, put down her bag, and slowly turned around to face her. He saw in her face that she was angry, but she wasn't crying. Her eyes burned with righteous indignation, but also a sense of confidence. He wasn't sure if she knew all she claimed, but he was certain that she thought she knew her subject as well as she claimed. "How?" he asked. "You have been on a planet without nobles, so no real school teachers nor proper education. How did you learn all of this?" Elizabeth looked at Wyatt. He wasn't scoffing at her claims, he just wanted an explanation. She sighed. "My father is a soldier. My mother and I always went with him wherever he went. He didn't think it was safe to leave us anywhere, and he taught me to read and write. He'd be sitting at his desk reading reports, and I wanted to know what he was reading, but he didn't want me to read the things he read, so instead he found books on nature and taught me to read using those. I found myself loving natural things, seeing the beauty in all of it rather than the death and destruction around us all the time. By the time I was 8, I wanted to be a biologist and maybe to teach." She scoffed a little. "The dream of the Grand Revolution never felt real to me, and I'm not a soldier. So wherever we went, I studied all the plants and animals, I taught myself to draw, and I worked out what all the complicated descriptions in the books meant so I could make an accurate list of everything I found. I even asked locals what they knew about different plants. I'm good, okay, but I'll never be a teacher now." Wyatt asked, even though he knew the answer. "Because you are not a noble, right?" Elizabeth nodded. "That, and I know now that I would have to do examinations to prove I know what I know. But there's probably nobody in the Principality that knows as much as I do about this world's animals and plants. But I will never be able to prove that." Now it was Wyatt's turn to sigh. "Look, I know what it's like to be a commoner. I even know what it's like to have dreams. I always wanted to go into space since I can remember. That was always my dream, even though I was a commoner. I got there, but because I was a plebeian, my job was taking containers full of rotting material to make compost." Elizabeth was shocked. "Really?" she asked, skeptical. Wyatt nodded. "Really, but I was happy because I had made it into space. I was living my dream. Perhaps not an intrepid explorer, but close enough. Then, through chance, I saved Princess Claire. Now I'm here, a blasted blue blood, with a barony I did not ask for and over 1,500 people, men, women, even some children whom I have to prepare for, and I won't be here for long either. Just until my ship is repaired so things can change. Sometimes in really weird ways. I guess I'm telling you not to give up your dreams. Now can we get to the town center so I can introduce our new plant and animal expert, please?" Elizabeth smiled and nodded. "If you insist, Wyatt." 3 minutes later, they walked into the square. A lot of activity was still going on around the inn. The windows were all open upstairs, with bedding resting on the window sills to air it. In the kitchen, the cooks and some of the others were preparing a cooking area for later, while at the front, Aino was sat taking copious notes about what people had found in the buildings around the square. Wyatt called everybody back out to the seating in front of the inn. "Everyone, this is Elizabeth. She knows all about the safe and the dangerous plants and animals on this world, so before you pick something up or try to eat it, check that it's safe to do so with her first. Now, as Aino here finishes taking your reports, I'd like you to go out in groups and explore the town. Aino will give you a map and tell you where to go. I'm going to have Elizabeth go to each group in turn, because it looks like every house has a garden, so she will see what's in those gardens and let you know if there's anything is safe or dangerous. But before she does that, will someone please show her an empty room so she can drop her stuff?" A young woman stuck her hand in the air and called out, "Yes, sir!" in response. And so Elizabeth picked up her bags and started to follow her into the inn. Wyatt raised his voice again. "Just one more thing. Elizabeth is our guest. Let's make sure we treat her with the respect she deserves. Is that clear?" Almost 40 voices all replied, "Sir, yes, sir." Wyatt then called over Michael Starrant. "Sergeant Major, I'd like you to escort Miss Elizabeth alongside a couple of your soldiers. Go to the locations Aino will show you, then I suggest going down to the harbor. Make sure everyone has returned by 1800, if you will." Sergeant Major Michael Starrant saluted and gave a crisp salute before going to select a couple of soldiers. "There's a plumber and a sewer worker here, I believe," said Wyatt. 2 hands went up into the air. Wyatt continued to speak. "Take a soldier with you and see if you can find where the water supply comes from and where the sewage goes. Better take the 3rd engineer with you as well." Wyatt called Declan over. "I won't ask anyone to do any job I'm not prepared to do. There's supposed to be a pair of flamethrowers in the supplies box, I assume, as a Marine. You know how to safely use one?" Declan's reply was straightforward. A trivial task, my lord. Great. Then go get a flamethrower, 4 of your men, and 6 gas masks. I'll go find some gloves and hopefully a brush and a spade, replied Wyatt. Looking up at the weather vane on the clock tower roof, he continued. The wind is blowing from the inn toward the station. We're going to clean out the butchers, bakers, and everything rotten in the fresh produce shop, take it behind the railway station, and burn it. The smoke and smell will be blown away from us, and hopefully the gas masks will protect us from the worst of the smells. Declan simply nodded and ran off to get his men and the equipment whilst Wyatt wandered into the kitchen. After checking they were not required, took a spare box of rubber gloves. Going outside, he found an old but intact portable waste bin with a lid, a twig broom, and a spade, which he took with him back to the square. Deciding to save the worst for last, they cleared out the stale bread from the bakery first, 2 waste bucket loads. Later, there was a pile of loaves on top of a mound of granite chippings in the middle of what had once been the rail yard. 45 minutes later, they had added some rotten fruit and vegetables to the pile. They had poured the liquids out onto the ground, rather than pouring it into the sewer. The butcher's shop, though, was bad. Even through the gas mask filters, the smell was almost overpowering, and flies buzzed everywhere. Hence, they opened the doors wide and used wedges to hold them open. Then, working as a team, they shoveled the putrid moving mess into the waste bin, took it to the pile, and emptied it out. One of Declan's servants found a bag full of sawdust, which they put over the floor. On the worktops and everywhere the rotting meat had fallen, they stood outside for half an hour, gulping deep breaths of fresh air before going back inside and sweeping and shoveling the now damp and very smelly sawdust into the bin, then carrying it down to the rail yard. Declan fired up the flamethrower as Wyatt and the servant stepped back. Another half an hour later, the fire was out, and the contents of the shops had been reduced to fine ash, as had the gloves they had all worn. They left the spade, broom, and bin in the rail yard. They would find a way to clean them later. Wyatt thought that if they were lucky, it would rain, really hard. It was after 4:30 in the afternoon by the time they started to walk back across the square. Wyatt noticed the medical technician sitting at the edge of the fountain, examining something. Then he realized the water was flowing out of the spouts and quickly ran over. The medic looked up as Wyatt approached. "Hello, sir. The water suddenly started flowing about 10 minutes ago. I was sitting in the shade when it started to flow, so I thought I should do some work and see what sort of water quality you have here." He gestured to the device he was using. "This will perform a wide range of tests. In this case, I've set it to perform an all-purpose drinkable water test, though we probably need to allow taps to run in houses and then perform the tests there as well. This will be ready in just a few more minutes." Wyatt was still waiting when suddenly the clock struck 2, which was odd for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it was 17 minutes to 5, and secondly, because the clock was not supposed to be working. Wyatt, Declan, and the medic worked it out at the same time. A chorus of electricity erupted, and Wyatt ran to the door of the inn looking for a light switch. Sure enough, as soon as he clicked the switch, the lights came on. Grinning, Wyatt left the lights on and walked back to the dock. "So, doctor, what does the test say?" he asked. The medic looked up with a smile, presenting his scanning device. "The water is surprisingly potable. No harmful parasites, heavy metals, or viral contaminants, just a little grit. However, I suggest running your taps for 10 minutes to clear any pipes and using disinfectants and filters to be absolutely sure. Oh, and my name, sir, is Medical Technician Matthew Smith. I could never be a doctor, or heavens prevent me claiming such a grand title, a physician." Wyatt winced. "I apologize, Matthew. My name is Wyatt," he said, offering his hand. Matthew stood up and, raising an eyebrow, shook Wyatt's hand. "I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to do that as a noble, sir." Wyatt laughed. "You are absolutely correct, Matthew. It's my way of reminding myself that I'm really just a commoner with a few skills who got lucky." "Speaking of luck, I'm guessing the electrician and the engineer found out how to switch the power on, and that somehow this also resulted in the water returning. Now all we have to do is wait for them to return to find out how they did it. Maybe they can set the clock to the right time for us as well," said Wyatt with another short laugh. Matthew smiled at that. "I agree, and speaking of luck, there are 2 unopened casks of beer in the inn cellar. I opened one and checked the contents for anything harmful. Other than the 6.5% alcohol content, it is drinkable, likely a hidden reserve stash of whoever was guarding this place. I did just try a sip, somewhat fruity and full-bodied with only natural bubbles. Quite a good ale, actually. Might I suggest that we permit those that would like a drink to enjoy one with their dinner tonight, sir? Smith, I cannot afford for people to get drunk, Wyatt replied, continuing with, but if you are absolutely sure the ale is safe, then I think we can allow the people to have a glass, if they wish, with whatever meal the cooks are preparing for us. Aino came out of the town hall and walked over to where the others were sitting. He sat at the table. I see the power is back on, he said as he did so. The others nodded in agreement. Aino continued, so I'm organizing the information by building number from the map you supplied Wyatt. For each building I have information on its condition, inside and out. I record if there are any obvious repairs required, and I have prioritized them so that essential repairs such as water entering the building has, for instance, greater importance than the inside needing fresh paint. I have also included sections for furniture. And since most properties appear to have gardens, I have included a section for those. I thought that might be useful if they have anything edible in the gardens, or anything else of interest. Wyatt was pleasantly surprised, so much so that he told Aino. Her Highness, Princess Clara, suggested I bring you along. I have to say I am now happy that I did. Keep up the good work. You're likely going to be living and working here for quite a while. Aino seemed about to reply, but at that moment the group of people Wyatt had sent off earlier to fix the power walked under the arch and back into the square. They looked tired, and sweat was running down their faces. When they saw the fountain in front of them, 4 of the 5 carefully dropped the weapons and equipment they had been carrying and ran over to cool themselves off under the streams of water. Smith called out to them, It's safe to drink if you are thirsty. At that moment, all 4 decided to drink from the water as it left the spouts of the fountain, cupping their hands to make it easier. The 5th soldier, having seen Wyatt, Declan, and Aino sitting at one of the tables, marched over towards them. Wyatt recognized the young woman who had previously told them about the tables and chairs they were currently sitting on. She walked up and crisply saluted them. Sir, Private Bauer returning with a party of 4 intact, sir, reporting a successful mission, sir. Wyatt looked at her. She looked tired but not exhausted, as if, had he asked her to do so, she could have gone off and performed any military task. Declan, in his marine armor, returned her salute, then looked to Wyatt. Thank you, Private Bauer. Why don't you go and refresh yourself and send the 2 civilians over here when they have cooled off? She saluted again, and she marched over to the fountain and spoke briefly with the civilians before taking her helmet off and dunking her whole head under water. After a couple more minutes, the electrician and the engineer walked over to where the nobles sat, and Wyatt gestured that they should sit in the nearby chairs, which they gratefully did, both sighing as the weight lifted from their feet. It must have been eventful, Wyatt commented. Let's have the report. For the next 15 minutes, the electrician and the engineer described in detail how they had determined, firstly, the direction of the power plant, and then how they had located it. Apparently, it was between 4 and 5 kilometers from the town, on the lower slopes of the mountain range, and comprised a low stone building into which 4 metal pipes fed water, or at least the pipes should all have fed water. When they arrived, there was no sign of anything working, and only a simple padlock secured the door, which the engineer removed with a set of bolt cutters. Inside, the equipment all looked pretty worn out, with much of it no longer working. As far as they could see, originally there had been a complicated electronic control box that would have adjusted the amount of electricity depending on demand, activating between 1 and 4 turbines as required. However, now only a single turbine appeared to be still functioning. To keep the turbine running, it needed to be kept lubricated. To ensure this, someone had built an oil reservoir on the top of the turbine with a float switch, so that when the oil was almost empty, the switch would stop the turbine, simple but effective. All they needed to do was refill the reservoir from the half-full large drum in the room and reset the valve that fed the turbine, and it started just like that. According to the engineer, there were a total of 4 turbines, each rated for 2.5 megawatts of output. The water must run down from quite high up the mountain to generate that kind of power, based on the size of the pipes. After passing through the turbines, it goes into a large underground reservoir. They passed the notes they had made of serial numbers and manufacturer's information for Aino to add to the records. With that, Wyatt asked, "Is there anything else?" The electrician paused, then said, Yes, sir. We would like to praise Lily, sir, Private Bauer. We think she probably saved us on the way back. There was a huge animal with sharp spines all over it that charged out of the trees straight towards us. She got between it and us and told us to back slowly away while she distracted it. She said it was nothing, but I'm sure she saved us." The engineer interrupted. "I'm not sure if that thing would have killed us, sir, but it certainly looked as if it wanted to hurt us, and it was big enough and ugly enough to have done so." Wyatt nodded. "I understand. Thank you, gentlemen. Please provide the details of the machinery to Ino here. Then, I have one hopefully small thing left to ask. Could you possibly look at the clock mechanism and see if you can set the time so that it's correct, please? It started up whilst you were away, I assume, due to the electricity being on." The two men nodded with a "Gladly, sir," from the electrician and an "Of course, sir," from the mechanic, then went to give the details to Ano for his records, 10 minutes after passing on the details, and the clock was now showing the correct local time of 14 minutes to 6. Just after the clock chimed 6, the team started to arrive and report their findings to Ino. It turned out that you could not carry out much of a survey in 5 hours. Between them, 2 of the teams had surveyed just 11 houses. One was marked as not habitable, but could be used for salvage, whilst the other 10 had various minor defects, but could all be lived in. Most of the gardens were listed as having what looked to be a good number of edible plants, be it fruiting trees, shrubs, or various vegetables. However, with spring approaching, only time would tell how much food each would deliver. Most also had larders roughly half-stocked with dried foods. Those preserved in glass jars. One house, with a slightly larger garden, had a large number of chickens. The vet was summoned and declared that all the birds would survive. The third team, with the architectural technician present, had done things differently. She had left the builder doing house surveys, with another 5 homes surveyed as a result. While she had wandered the streets immediately around the area they had been sent to and marked down 10 buildings that were currently unusable as homes, noting them down as either needing to be demolished or possibly able to be repaired, adding that some of the buildings requiring demolition would certainly yield materials for those requiring repair. She had also found a school and a small empty structure that might be used as either a warehouse or workshop. Both of these later 2 buildings were more solidly built, each with a slate roof, which meant that both showed no obvious faults other than fresh coats of paint being required, because she had not had any way of breaking in. She had only been able to look through the windows at ground level, reporting just empty rooms with no sign of damage. The plumber and sewage worker team had returned with mixed results. From their investigations, greatly helped by the power returning, they had discovered that the water supply was in excellent shape within the town, that there was a dual system of drainage in the town, with sewage going to a separate treatment center compared to the rest of the wastewater. The drains themselves could apparently do with some cleaning, but must have been regularly maintained because all the ones they had opened were still running. The wastewater plant, however, needed a considerable amount of work on its machinery. Only the basic filters functioned, extracting debris from the water, whilst the sewage plant far over on the western edge of town overlooking the sea was mixed news. It had clearly once been a sophisticated system collecting gases and producing pelletized fertilizer whilst also providing additional power and heating. Now, however, the gas collecting and filtration system no longer worked, nor did the power plant for heating the homes. But on the plus side, the sewage was actually being processed still and not poured straight into the sea. The last team back were those from the harbor. They had been there all day, and so their report was more comprehensive. The harbor itself was constructed where the river entered the sea. Solid stone granite walls had been built around the harbor and forming a wall partially across the mouth of the river to form a safe anchorage. Growth on the sea walls indicated a maximum tidal range of about 3 meters, with enough water even at low tide for small boats to enter or leave the harbor. But the larger vessels would need to wait until there was at least 1 meter of water or more. Fortunately, the harbor mouth had an indicator of water level. A small lighthouse at the end of the harbor breakwater marked the harbor entrance, and 2 smaller lit markers would guide vessels into the harbor's safety. Beyond the walls of the harbor, there was a wide, sandy cove to the west of the harbor entrance, with steps giving access to the beach, along with what appeared to be a large, slightly damaged swimming pool that would originally have filled with each high tide but now needed some repairs to its walls. Inside the harbor, 6 boats sat on moorings. As described by the fishermen, there were 2 15-meter-long fishing vessels, complete with all fixtures, fittings, and nets required for fishing out at sea. One with an almost full fuel tank, whilst the other had maybe 1/4 of a tank. For both, their engines started and there were no leaks that he worried about. There were 2 more 9-meter-long vessels apparently used, judging by the devices the fishermen called pots, for catching crabs and lobsters or whatever Hago had as their equivalent close to the shore. Again, the vessels seemed sound and the engines started, with both having roughly half-full fuel tanks. The last 2 boats in the water were small 6- and 7-meter-long crafts with no cabin or shelter of any kind. Only one had a working engine, with a half-full tank of fuel. The other had a seized and rusted engine that would need replacement before it could be used. To the eastern side of the harbor, a rocky headland provided shelter. It was here that a substantial boat shed, as the boat builder called it, had been constructed. Partially cut into the rock itself, it measured some 20 meters by 100 meters internally, with doors that allowed even the largest vessels in the harbor to be brought inside, then lifted out by an internal overhead crane, whilst the outside of the building looked pretty. The inside had clearly been built by someone more used to military installations. With lots of concrete and steel in evidence, there was a second large fishing boat and 2 small vessels within, all in need of repair. There was also a lot of bits of boats, clearly salvaged from other vessels. They had only been able to have a really good look round once the power had returned, which had been given away by the lighthouse becoming active. But the builder claimed the workshop, whilst messy and dirty, looked to be well equipped, but that he would not know more without another day of sorting through things. Also on the eastern side, but slightly further up the valley, were 2 rows of 12 white-painted, stone-built, terraced 2-bedroom houses. Some of these had been unlocked. They had looked around. Inside, all had been fairly similar, with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, a living and dining room plus a small kitchen downstairs, and out behind them small gardens nestling into the hillside. At the rear of the gardens, most had either a covered or an enclosed area cut into the rock itself, in which they found the typical things a fisherman might use to repair nets or do other basic work. Each house's rear garden could be reached due to a path with connecting gates that ran right behind the houses. Elizabeth took advantage of that path to examine the gardens, listing half a dozen edible plant types found in each one. To travel from the east to the west side of the harbor, there was a wide stone bridge that crossed the river at the back of the harbor. The river was approximately 8 or 9 meters wide at this point, perhaps a meter deep and fast-flowing. On the west side of the harbor, right next to the river, and also crossed by the bridge, was a narrow-gauge railway line that rose from harbor up to the goods yards in the station area. Climbing about 35 or 40 meters in height over its almost 1-kilometer length, a central gear-toothed rail ran between the regular rails, suggesting that the line required an engine with a suitable cog between its wheels to haul trains up to the goods yard. Beyond the track, a cobbled road also went up the hill with more white-painted stone houses on its western side. However, these ones were detached and slightly larger. At the bottom of the road at a T-junction, it turned to the west. 3 substantial houses looked out towards the sea. However, the westernmost one's front garden mainly was filled with sand from the beach. On the corner of the seaward side of the junction between the harbor and the beach stood a small stone building with a faded sign reading "Fresh Fish and Chips" at the top, and lower down ice creams in several flavors were listed. Finally, on the western side of the harbor itself were a series of open-fronted storage areas, some of which had doors or gates enclosing them, in which various fishing gear was piled. Nets, ropes, buoys, lobster pots, and plastic crates were there in abundance. At the end, where the rails from the narrow gauge track had once entered through double doors, was a large, ruined wooden building, likely once the fish-packing shed. Now it was just a pile of crushed timbers. Likely with the rail lines no longer working, packing the fish would have stopped. So, damage to the structure in storms would not have been repaired. 3 small manual cranes on this side of the harbor would have been used to lift off the fish crates from the vessels in the harbor, one of which still worked perfectly, but the other 2 would need maintenance at the very least. Wyatt sat back, making notes on his own tablet, while Ino had taken all the detailed information. While everyone else went to clean up before the evening meal, he spoke to Ino and Declan. "Well, this is a mess. If we include the buildings around the square, we have at best got results for 100 buildings out of almost 3,000. We need to get this going faster. I've not even been able to see the farms, let alone the forest, and then we might have dangerous wild animals out there as well. I have no idea how this will work. I have at most 6 more days left to get this set up so we can bring down the survivors. Declan waited patiently to add, "It's not all bad news, my lord. We do have electricity and water running." "Yes," said Wyatt, "but for how much longer? You heard the report, just 1 turbine out of 4 working, and that one is barely holding together." This time, Ino interrupted. "Forgive me, Wyatt, but I think we need more people examining the buildings." "How many more are up there?" he asked, pointing towards the sky. Wyatt called up the file on his datapad. "Let's see, we have in total more than 40 builders. There are also 18 carpenters, 3 decorators, 12 plumbers, more than 20 sewer workers, and over 50 general handymen, and 2 more architectural technicians. There are also about 30 mechanics in total, and another 26 metal workers of various types. But we are really short on equipment unless we can find things here, like those in the boat shed, which reminds me there are 4 more boat builders as well." The 3 of them sat considering this for a few minutes before Ino yelled out, "I think I have the answer." Wyatt looked at him. "Please do tell me, man. I'll hear any idea because I certainly don't have any on how to solve this mess." Ino looked at the notes he had made. "A shuttle can carry 50 people. First thing in the morning, go and collect the 50 general handymen, or rather 48, and the other 2 architectural technicians. Let's have our existing architectural technicians split the town into 3 areas, each one to be supervised by a technician." He paused for a moment as he made hand motions. "The technician gets 16 handymen and sends each one out with a map and instructions to return with a report every 2 hours. All the handyman needs to do is mark down obviously damaged or ruined structures, and if each structure on the map is a house or a shop or some sort of industrial building or something else which is not obvious to them." Wyatt caught on at this point. "So whilst they are doing those first 2 hours walking around, I can fetch all the remaining builders and many of the carpenters. We have enough wooden buildings here that they can easily check many of them." Ino nodded in agreement. With nearly 3,000 buildings, we should at least know all the houses in the town and many of the other structures by the end of tomorrow, with each handyman identifying less than 60 properties, just by walking past them and making a note. We are going to need more printed maps. 60 buildings divided by 8 hours means 1 every 8 minutes, allowing for walking back to the technician every 2 hours, or maybe the technician walking to them and handing over maps that should work. Plus, we can send the builders and carpenters down to the harbor first thing in the morning to look at the buildings there. Wyatt sat, his mouth slightly ajar, as Ino could do those calculations in his head. He looked at Declan, who, though clearly not quite as impressed as Wyatt, looked at Ino respectfully. Thinking out loud, he said, "If I am going to make all these arrangements and get all these maps printed off, I should get back to the Noir Navio. Then I can go from there first thing in the morning and pick up the handymen and maintenance workers with those 2 architectural assistants." Declan put a hand on his arm. "A moment, my lord. Would it not be better to join the dinner with the first residents of your barony before going back to the ship? After all, you still have to eat." For a moment, Wyatt sat and thought to himself, "Shit, he's right. These people have all been working hard all day. If I just vanish, then I'm no better than any wretched blue blood who doesn't care about the commoners. I swore I'd never become one, and I almost did." Looking at Declan, he chose his next words carefully. "Thank you, Sir Declan, for reminding me not only that once again I have gone for much of the day without eating, but also for reminding me that I need to thank everyone for their hard work today. Her Highness was correct. It would appear that I do indeed need you." The surprise on Declan's face when he told him that it was Clara who suggested he accept his offer of service and that he needed him almost made up for the "my lords" that Declan kept using. All 3 got up and went into the inn for food. Inside, those who had stayed at the inn during the day had clearly been hard at work. Everything had been cleaned, and the metal cutlery gleamed. A large glass of beer was issued to everyone who wanted one. Wyatt gave a terse speech thanking all for their efforts that day, and then the food was served. After dinner, Wyatt slipped away back to the shuttle as he started procedures and got clearance to return to the Noir Navio. A thought came to him. How were they going to get the builder, the carpenter, the farmer, and the vet out to all the farms? They were not far from the town center, but visiting all 3 on foot would mean at least a 10-kilometer walk plus an unknown amount of time on the farms themselves. They needed a vehicle, but the only ground vehicles on the ship were tanks, not suitable for visiting farms. As he rose into the darkening sky, he got on the radio again. "Put me through to General Swallowtail," he ordered. 3 minutes later, the familiar voice of the general came over the airwaves. "Greetings, Baron Staples. Has something happened to my daughter?" Day 1 end.